The federal bureaucracy is an interesting institution of American government. Although it's part of the executive branch, and therefore under the purview of the president, the day-to-day operations of the federal bureaucracy occur mostly independently of presidential direction. As your text mentions, the federal bureaucracy is sometimes called the fourth branch of government because it's distinct enough from the president that it merits examination on its own terms. The lecture files in this module will help to clarify what bureaucracy is, how it evolved in American government, how it's structured today, and why it's important for understanding American politics. Bureaucracy is a particular way of organizing government to carry out public functions. It literally means rule by desks. This terminology gets at the impersonal nature of bureaucracy, in that it implies a government structured by positions, or desks, if you will, that have been created to carry out specific functions. Of course, people have to occupy those positions or desks, but the idea is that the work of these people will be highly structured by their job descriptions. The first person to detail the importance of bureaucracy as a form of organization in modern life was the sociologist Max Weber. He identified a number of important characteristics of this type of organization. First, Weber noted that bureaucracy is characterized by its hierarchical chain of command. Hierarchy is intended to be an efficient way to manage large organizations, with decision-making authority flowing from the top down and information about the detailed effects of the organization's actions flowing from the bottom up. So, for example, let's apply the graphic in this slide to the State Department. At the top of the hierarchy, you have the Secretary of State, who has ultimate management authority over nearly 25,000 employees that carry out diplomatic relations throughout the world. The Secretary of State, in consultation with the President, gives instructions to the various offices under his command about priorities and policies for the department. For instance, let's say that Hollywood studios and big American tech companies have been complaining to the Secretary of State that their intellectual property is being widely pirated in certain foreign countries. The Secretary of State could make it a priority to address this problem by sending instructions down the chain of command to figure out what's going on and what can be done to apply pressure on foreign governments to crack down on intellectual piracy within their borders. Those instructions would flow through increasingly specialized offices, from the Undersecretary for Economic Growth, Energy, and the Environment, to the Office for Economic and Business Affairs, to the Office of Intellectual Property Enforcement. Workers at this lowest end of the chain of command would gather information about the piracy problem, use whatever discretion they might have to address the problem, and then communicate back up through the chain of command what progress they've achieved, or what obstacles are standing in the way, and what resources they might need to further address the problem. The second characteristic of bureaucracy is specialization. Positions within bureaucratic organizations are staffed by people having different skills to carry out different organizational functions. By specializing, bureaucracies are able to exercise greater technical expertise than if they simply hired on the basis of general or generic skills. So for instance, the image on this slide is a recent screenshot from the Department of Housing and Urban Development's job board, showing some of the specialized positions they were hiring for. The supervisory attorney position was to be filled with someone who had the training and experience to provide legal advice to the department's headquarters about departmental actions. The portfolio management specialists were to be filled by people specialized in working with property owners to manage the department's affordable housing portfolio. And the loan guarantee specialist was to develop programs to lower the risk of mortgage failures for people living on Indian reservations. The main idea here is that bureaucratic organizations seek out people with specialized expertise to carry out narrowly defined functions within the organization. Related to specialization is the idea of merit-based employment in a bureaucracy. This simply means that jobs are rewarded based on a candidate's professional skills to carry out the specialized functions of a particular position, rather than based on political connections, like whether they're the nephew of a major donor to the party in power, for example. So, for instance, the housing and urban development positions listed on the previous slide are filled based on an applicant's demonstrated skills, knowledge, and background to provide legal advice, or manage an affordable housing portfolio, or create programs that reduce the risk of mortgage defaults, without any consideration of politics entering into the hiring decision. One of the last important characteristics of bureaucracy that I want to highlight is its rule-based approach. Bureaucracies tend to operate largely by standard operating procedures. These spell out how common tasks in the organization should be performed. The purpose of having such a rules-based focus is to ensure impartial or impersonal administration of government programs, with the idea that similar cases should be treated similarly, not based on the whims of an individual government administrator. So this is why, for instance, when citizens come into contact with government programs, they often have to fill out a lot of forms. The idea being that the information contained in those forms should drive the decision-making about how your case or your benefits will be handled, rather than whether the government worker you came into contact with happens to feel sympathy for you or not. The graphic on this slide shows a template from the city of Riverside, California, for creating a standard operating procedure. It's a good example of the logic behind SOPs. Maybe the city's health department could use this form to develop a procedure if, say, they needed to come up with a logical approach to restaurant inspections. By following a procedure described in detail, they can make sure every inspection follows the same steps, guaranteeing a similar outcome to an inspection, regardless of who the individual inspector happens to be.